I have never done a video ranking a ton of watch brands, but this is about to change. Who's the best? Which brand should be avoided? And where do you get value for money? You've seen these kind of videos before, but not quite like this one. Hopefully my version will be useful. I'm going to do my best. So instead of just talking about my personal opinion on who has the nicest watches, I'm going to be a teeny tiny bit more methodical. For every brand, I'll cover how strong they are as a brand, notable products, their key strengths, their main weaknesses, and would I be willing to pay retail? Here's 10 brands and 10 assessments. Let's dive in. Christopher Ward. What are they? They are a direct-to-consumer brand that promises massive value and fair pricing. They sit at around $1,000 to $2,000 with some more complicated watches going all the way up to $5,000. Their notable watches are the Christopher Ward 12, which at the price point is a class-leading integrated sports bracelet. They have more niche but very enthusiast popular models like the Belcanto with a chiming complication, a couple of moon phases, and even a skeletonized 12 with an in-house built movement. They have tons of dive watches and field watches that are also worth a look. Their watches are well made and they are very well priced. You get a lot for your money. They primarily use sourced Zenith movements, which are generally solid, dependable, and wearable. Some people might feel that a lot of their designs are a little bit too inspired by comparable models from Rolex and Seiko or others, and I would generally say that's not entirely untrue. They are not design-wise the most original in the core catalog, but they do generally offer a quality that is very fair for the price and very good-looking watches. I would be totally okay with paying retail. They are huge value, but if you already have watches that look like a certain Christopher Ward, I would understand if you didn't find them compelling. Tudor's the little brother of Rolex. They have been a marketing powerhouse since their relaunch in the US about 20 odd years ago. They live on the brand Born to Dare and are generally a darling of watch enthusiasts, publications, and also us YouTubers. They originally positioned themselves as a value alternative to Rolex, basically a kind of Rolex light, but with their own identity. All round, their watches are very, very good. The movements are solid, the designs are attractive and very contemporary. They have generally put out watches that appeal to modern consumers' tastes. Their strengths are mostly in dive watches, so you've got the Pelagos, the Pelagos FXT, the Blancpains in 41, 39 and 37 millimeters. This is what they do best. All of them are sufficiently different to be unique. You have fixed lugs for the man who wants to embrace the more toolish Navy SEAL kind of vibe. You've got more refined and more retro for the vintage hipster dude in the BB54. And your all-round modern outdoorsy and not so office-forward man has the Blancpain 41 and the 58. As I see it, they have two weaknesses. Their watches are very middle of the road. Their designs all round are aimed at what is broadly popular. They are excellently made, but they are unoffensive. If I were really rough on them, I would say some people would find them borderline boring. They are so simply designed that they will likely be wearable for an incredibly long time, but there's no edge to them. And second, they are starting to get a little bit expensive. That whole value thing is less important to them these days. I do expect them to shift even more upmarket in the coming years. Would I pay retail? Yes, but I would never pay above retail. Sometimes a new model will be hard to get a hold of, but pretty much all models eventually trade slightly below retail, give it a couple of months. Blancpain and Breguet make up the two brands that Swatch more or less have forgotten about. Blancpain these years is relatively anonymous despite the Swatch collab apparently leading to more sales. Models like the Villerettes are not interesting enough for me from a design perspective to get me interested. The Air Command is fine and the 50 Fathoms was always too big. Currently, I do feel they are a one model brand for most people, with the new 42mm 50 Fathoms being a step in the right direction. It's a lot of money for a dive watch and it is a bit on the thick side, mainly because of the monster of a movement that's inside the case, but I still think it's a fabulous watch that nobody seems to care about. When you buy a Blancpain and especially a 50 Fathoms, you have to assess more than its diver credentials. This watch is finished in terms of case style and movement to a degree where Omega and Rolex can't come close. If you can appreciate those things, this watch is totally worth it. If not, the price is completely unreasonable. I generally wouldn't pay retail, and apart from that 42mm, I'm not compelled by their current lineup. I'm aware that historical limited edition models are pretty much always hard to get a hold of, but in general lineup, no, I would stick below retail. Zenith is a weird brand because it's not one brand. They are three. They are the Zenith Extremes with divers and chronos and ceramics that in terms of design and marketing heavily mimic the likes of Hublot. They are typically big, they are brash, they are usually technically quite impressive, but they are big, giant bricks. I tried the Diver Extreme on at Watches and Wonders. It looked great until I put it on the included NATO. It looked like it was floating above my wrist. You generally need to be a bigger gentleman to be able to wear them. But then there's the second Zenith brand, which is the middle-of-the-road chronograph brand. It's watches like the Chronomaster Sport, which are very explicitly built to steal market share from the Speedmaster and the Daytona. They are great watches, but to some extent, some consumers will see them as the fallback for that Daytona that they can't get. I think they're pretty cool watches. They are well designed, and if you can get over the whole Daytona reference or Daytona reminder, it's actually a pretty cool watch. Finally, there's the original brand, which is the brand that resonates most with me. This is where you get the reimaginings of vintage Zenith models. This is the 60s and 70s with weird case shapes and cool colors. This is the Zenith that I personally prefer. Branding wise, like I said, they are a bit all over the place because of these three distinct segments, which leads them to not feeling cohesive as a brand. Their movements are typically cool, but you have to be a 1/10 of a second or 5 hertz kind of person to appreciate them. Their bracelets are often not the best, and I have heard that they can have QC issues. I would generally not pay retail. Every time I mention Rolex in a video, two things happen. Somebody writes, "You're starting to talk too much about Rolex. You're a closet fanboy." And somebody else writes, "Rolex sucks. It's all marketing." Well, one, I will talk about any brand if a topic interests me. I'm not a fanboy, but I'm also not in the habit of hating Rolex, Hublot, or any other brand because that is the du jour opinion these days. Is Rolex all marketing? No, but they are likely the best in the world at marketing, not just as a watchmaker. Their strengths are middle of the road, luxury looking timepieces with robust movements that will last for a lifetime. Whether they just insourced some manufacturer 20 or 30 years ago is irrelevant to me. Whether they innovate at a snail's pace is also irrelevant. A Datejust looks good, has very few flaws, feels expensive, and will work for ages. Their weakness, you can't have the one you really want. Jumping through hoops at ADs is a national pastime by now, and it's tiring for something of which 1.2 million are made every year. Their watches are also incredibly similar. You can own 3 Omegas or 3 Zeniths and they will all look very different. But a GMT is a premium looking Submariner, and a Submariner is a less toolish Explorer 2. Another weakness? They are exclusive and the ultimate success watch for the masses, but honestly, in every office I've ever worked in, they were the most common watches apart from, in recent years, smartwatches. It's a bit of a paradox, but you are more likely to see someone wearing a Rolex than see someone wearing a TAG Heuer. TAG sells about 500,000 watches a year. Rolex sells more than double that. So yes, they are exclusive to get, but once you have one, they are practically everywhere. If you like them, cool, I do, but mathematically and statistically, they're not special. I would pay retail if I didn't have to wait in line. There are very few models I would actually wait in line for. Grand Seiko does not have branding that I think appeals to many people in the West. The whole Japanese simplicity thing I think works against them. The humility and in some ways engineering forward way of communicating is just a bit bland. The watches, however, are generally of a very high standard and you get a ton of watch for your money. Their strengths are their dress watches and their simpler dress style watches. Their watches are simple and elegant, the movements are excellent, and the finishing is top-notch. The notable models are white birches, the snowflakes, and the shunbuns. Their weaknesses are that to some, their watches are a little bit too restrained. If you're looking for the almost ostentatiousness of a Datejust or an Aquaterra, you're generally not getting that from a Grand Seiko. Their watches tread a much finer line between the dress and flash of something like an Aquaterra and the toolish vibe of something like a Sinn 556. For some people, they're not toolish enough, and for others, they're not premium looking enough. These watches do appeal to those with a little bit more nuanced tastes. That can be seen as a bit boring. Their divers and their chronos are often on the big side for some, and again, are not quite Daytona Flash or Hanhart Simple. I wouldn't buy retail despite them being excellent value for all the specs you get. Sinn, the company with the oldest homepage on the internet. I say this in kindness, but I swear this is an HTML homepage built from 2003 and it really hurts them, I think. They don't necessarily have to be sponsored by Squarespace, but just a little bit more pep would be cool. The reason I start with their site is because their site sort of embodies what Sinn are. They are thoroughly practical, functional watches. They have a no-nonsense die watch in the U50 that is only 11.5 millimeters thick. It goes all the way to 500 meters. It's fully tegimented, so you could stick this watch in a box of sandpaper and it wouldn't scratch. They have the 104, the 105. They make tool watches with a tool-forward design. They don't state that the watch could survive a thermonuclear explosion, but they likely adhere to some obscure German engineering standard that ensures that they could. Their weakness? They undersell themselves, and they are so explicitly tool-forward that they don't always appeal to modern customers. Would I pay retail? Absolutely. Not that they hold value, because they don't. Most watches don't, but they make some of the best beater watches out there. But high-end beaters that will never look like beaters. Longines is the We Are Not Tudor brand. It's a little bit harsh, I know, but I stand by it in the context of their marketing. They sell way more watches than Tudor, but marketing-wise, they just don't have the same clout, or haven't, at least for the last 10 or so years. They've got tons of good watches. The Spirit Zulu Time, the Hydro Conquest, the Magitech. They have good field watches. They have the Legend Diver. They are solid, they look premium, and they typically come in at a lower price than Tudor. Their weaknesses? Like a lot of brands, their dress watches are a bit forgettable. They have way too many offerings, and that hurts them in terms of seeming cohesive as a brand. I also think that the kind of like or not as cool as Tudor perception that there is around them is not healthy for the brand. Once somebody's hooked on Tudor, I do think it's hard to convince someone that Longines is an alternative. In some ways, I do think it's a brand that's at risk of declining in stature simply because they are a bit in a no man's land sometimes. They're not quite cheap, but they're not quite premium. But their watches, most of them are really, really good. Pricing wise, I'm going below retail. There are two kind of Bremont customers. Customer 1 has never heard of Bremont and doesn't care. Customer 2 is incredibly loyal to Bremont and most likely hates the relatively new direction Bremont has gone for. I like the Bremont Broadsword. It's a cool watch. It's the most toolish of field watches and a much more interesting option than an Explorer or a Tudor Ranger. They have other watches that are very nice, but it does take some digging sometimes. For Bremont, it's not, again, like Tudor, where a vast majority of models are actually quite popular. And the reason I use Tudor is not because I'm in love with Tudor, it's because they are very popular, and using them as a reference point is good because a large number of people can relate. Referencing a more obscure brand just isn't useful for everybody watching. Bremont's weaknesses, in my mind, are big. I've done a deep dive, but here's the high level. They have the Terra Nova, the Supermarine, and the Altitude lines. So field, air, and water. The Terra Novas remind me of Hamilton khaki fields. The Supermarine reminds me of Hamilton khaki navies. And the Altitudes remind me of the Hamilton khaki aviations. Bremont currently, to me, feels like the more expensive Hamiltons. That would, I suppose, be fine, but there are three key sub-challenges. The execution on a lot of the models is just not as consistent as even Hamilton. They're just not as good looking. 2, at this price, these watches come across as expensive for tool watches. Other YouTubers have stated that the price is okay for what you get. I disagree completely. They don't look like luxury watches, and at this price, there needs to be polished bits and applied markers. They just don't look the price. You should consider watching my video on perceived quality in the corner for more on that. They're not the only ones other than Hamilton that segment on this land, sea, and air logic, but it just seems so wholly unoriginal in its implementation. There's nothing uniquely Bremont about the branding. It feels from a positioning standpoint like they're going for the arithmetic mean of the market. They could do better. There are some, but not a lot of models I'd buy. Last one this time around, IWC. Say IWC and people say pilot's watch. In a distant second, they might say Ingenieur or Portuguese. That's them branding wise. IWC are a brand that a lot of people know, but not a lot of people identify with. They are literally a brand where people see the name and say, I know them. And then they keep on walking. Sure, they sell 150,000 watches, but considering how well known their name is, that's actually a little bit unremarkable. It's fine. Their best products? Well, they have quite a few. The top seller, I would guess, is something like the IWC Pilot Mark 20 or a Pilot Chrono. Those Pilot watches are kind of their thing, and they sell them at a premium version of what Leico and Stover do for a fraction of the price. The Ingenieur is a very good looking watch. Some might say it's a bit conformist in terms of design. I'd suggest you watch ID Guy's video about it. I consider it the defining analysis of the Ingenieur. There's also the Portuguese, which is also a watch that is considered, one you should know about. They are also quite good at complications. You wouldn't think so, but some of the work they do on annual, perpetual, and infinite calendars is ridiculously cool for reasonably good price. You generally also get a lot for your money in terms of tech specs, power reserve, easy adjust bracelets, and all that kind of stuff. Their weaknesses? Their Portuguesa is mostly just a dress watch and a little bit of a big dress watch at that. It's maybe a little bit unfair to call it a weakness because I quite like them, but I think a lot of people like the brand, see the watch, look at it and think, nice watch, and then they move on to JLC or Rolex or Cartier. I do think it's a weakness that they lack some wow factor. They've been trying to make newer models more sporty by making sportier Pilates chronos and also putting on a sportier bracelet on the Portuguesa. I don't think they're succeeding just yet. Overall, it's kind of not good for them that their watches are often labeled as nice. Would I pay retail? God, no. IWC plummets like a brick thrown overboard over the Mariana Trench. Even the Ingenieur barely holds its value, and that's a Genta. Every brand on this list, apart maybe from Bremont, has at least one watch I would buy. Every brand, though, I think here makes watches of a quality that I think are worth buying. Compared to the brand presence, some are overrated, some are underrated. What you think of them is more important for your buying experience than what I think of them. Buy what you like. Remember that. Leave a comment if you have thoughts on these brands. Tell me if you like this style of video or not. Like, subscribe. Cheers.